Brought to you by the Astro Youth House chapter from STEM Arts Lab, Space on Earth is a student-led podcast that inspires listeners who are curious about space to explore the wonders of the universe through the voices of young thinkers, creators, and dreamers.
Each episode blends personal curiosity with scientific discovery, from the mysterious depths of black holes to the practical impacts of space on Earth, like GPS, climate science, and medicine.
Hosted by STEM Arts students from Taos, New Mexico, this podcast draws connections between space, art, and science, how these things all impact us here on Earth, and their meaning to humanity.
You'll hear raw, insightful conversations about topics like light pollution, the overview effect, lunar exploration, and the societal impact of the space race.
Whether you're into exoplanets, dark energy, or just stargazing from your backyard, Space on Earth makes space personal, accessible, and inspiring. We believe that space isn't just for astronauts and scientists, it's for everyone.
Join us on this adventure as we explore the cosmos from Earth, one story at a time.
Special thanks to the Lore Foundation for helping launch this podcast.
Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Space on Earth. I'm Taylor.
I'm Hattie.
I'm Tulsi.
I'm Serena.
And I'm Wyatt.
And today we're here to talk to you guys about our wonderful neighbor, the planet Mars. When you look outside at the night sky, it's almost difficult to not notice the beautiful glowing red light in the sky. And from our planet, even with the naked eye, we can see the wonderful, amazing planet that is Mars. And Mars is orbiting just 140 million miles away, which sounds like a huge number, but in the scale of how large space is, that's pretty close to us. And for centuries, and really since we've started studying astronomy as human beings, humans have been really fascinated with Mars, especially because it's our nearby planet. And it's been very prevalent in culture and science fiction and science, pretty much every aspect of how we think about space outside of our atmosphere. So this episode, we're really going to be talking about everything in relation to Mars. So its physical features, what makes it different than other planets. And we're also going to be talking about what Mars means to us. How do you want to get us started talking about Mars?
Yeah, let's start with the basics. So Mars is the fourth planet from the sun, and it's sitting just beyond Earth. Compared to our planet, it's much smaller, so it's only about half the size, and its gravity is just 38% of Earth. So if you weigh 150 pounds here, on Mars you only weigh about 57. Mars spins on an axis, almost like Earth. A Martian day or so lasts 24 hours and 39 minutes, so only a tiny bit longer than ours. But its year is nearly twice as long, with 687 Earth days. That means if you lived on Mars, you'd wait almost 2 Earth years to celebrate your next birthday. So Mars also has seasons because it tilts on its axis like Earth. But with that longer year, its seasons last twice as long. Temperatures are much harsher than Earth, averaging about minus 80 degrees Fahrenheit. At the poles, it can plunge to minus 195. But near the equator in summer, it can surprisingly reach a comfortable 70 degrees. So even though Mars feels familiar in some ways, its environment is extreme and very different from Earth. Tulsi, do you want to tell us a little bit about the surface and landscape?
Yeah, Mars is a dusty red rock because its soil contains iron oxide, which is basically rust. And it's home to some of the most jaw-dropping features in the solar system. There's Olympus Mons, which is a volcano that's 3 times taller than Mount Everest and around as wide as the state of Arizona. Then there's Valles Marineris, Valles Marineris, which is a canyon system that stretches around 2,000 miles long, which is about 10 times the size of the Grand Canyon. Mars also has polar ice caps that are made of water and frozen carbon dioxide, or dry ice, that expand and shrink with the seasons. And from time to time, the entire planet is swallowed by massive dust storms that can last for months. Imagine being in a blizzard, except instead of snow, it's red dust and it never ends. Or do you want to talk about the atmosphere and climate?
Yeah, totally. So when we think about Mars, there's one very important thing to consider when we think about even the possibility of life on Mars is that the atmosphere is incredibly thin and less than even 1% of what Earth's atmosphere is like. And so that atmosphere, that very thin layer, is made of about 95% carbon dioxide, which is a tiny trace of oxygen, which means that our lungs, we wouldn't be able to breathe there without a spacesuit and added oxygen. And the other downside to this thin atmosphere means that there's not pretty much any protection from really harmful radiation, and also liquid water can't survive on the surface for long. So that means that you'd have any surface water would be freezing or evaporating instantly. But there's also a lot of activity going on Mars in its own way, very different than Earth. So we have really strong winds on this planet, and that's constantly moving and sand and dust. So you get these really incredible dunes and really unique landscapes on Mars. Tulsi, do you want to talk about? I touched on water on Mars. Do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah. One of the biggest questions that we've always had about Mars is people want to know if it had water at one point. And it actually did. We know that Mars used to have rivers, lakes, and possibly even oceans. But because the surface is covered in dried riverbeds and minerals that can only form in liquid water. So today, most of that water is probably frozen in the polar ice caps or trapped underground. But this discovery is pretty big because where there's water, there could have been life at one point. And I think Hattie knows more about that than I do. Hattie, you want to talk about that?
Yes, life on Mars. Did life ever exist on Mars? So, billions and millions of years ago, Mars had a much thicker atmosphere and flowing liquid water. That means it might have once have supported simple life forms of life like microbes. In the 1990s, a Martian meteorite found in Antarctica created a huge stir. When scientists thought that they saw fossilized bacteria inside, the evidence was like heavily debated, but it reignited a lot of curiosity. So today, NASA's rovers like Curiosity and Perseverance are still searching for answers. They're looking for organic molecules and other chemical biosignatures that could possibly hint at past life. Perseverance is even collecting like rock samples that may one day be brought back to Earth for deeper study, but we haven't found any proof yet. However, the possibility that life once existed on Mars or even could still survive hidden underground is probably one of the greatest mysteries driving space exploration today. So, speaking of Perseverance and Curiosity, Serena, do you want to tell us a little bit about the robots on Mars?
Yeah. Exploring Mars with robots, our robotic explorers have been doing the heavy lifting. The Viking landers in the 1970s were the first to search for life. Then came Spirit and Opportunity in the early 2000s, which roamed the dusty plains for years, far longer than expected. Today, the Curiosity rover is still climbing a mountain inside Gale Crater, studying climate history. The Perseverance rover, which landed in 2021, is exploring an ancient river delta, searching for signs of past life. And let's not forget Ingenuity, the tiny helicopter that became the first aircraft to fly on another planet. Orbiters like NASA's MAVEN and the European Space Agency's Mars Express continue to scan the planet from above, mapping its surface and atmosphere. Together, these missions have transformed Mars from a mystery into a world we're beginning to understand. And with that, Taylor, do you want to get into Mars with the culture?
Yeah, of course. So in our culture, Mars plays a really significant part. And we, like how I mentioned earlier, when humans think of outer space and other planets, Mars is really our first example. because it's so close and we know enough about it to feel familiar, but also there's so much that we don't know that has this like mysterious, and it has that kind of awe that comes when we think about Mars. And so when we think about Mars and its origins of how humans think about it culturally, so the Romans named the planet after their god of war. And mostly because of its blood red color is really where that connection came from. And then after that, in the 19th century, is when astronomers thought they saw canals on the surface. And people took that connection of, okay, we have this mystical planet that we don't know that much about, and there's a possibility of hiding spaces, which of course then comes to advanced Martian civilizations. And this was really significant in pop culture, especially in science fiction genres. Some of the most well-known examples being like H.G. Wells gave us War of the Worlds. And then so that's where a bunch of like science fiction and alien movies come in, which have just been like really common tropes, really fascinating storylines for a while. But then if you look on the more realistic side, a really famous book later then adapted to an incredible movie, The Martian, talks about what would it be like to actually survive on Mars. And so when you look in media and culture, there's always been this incredible fascination with the red planet. And it's we see that in every aspect, especially in science fiction. So I think that's really neat. And I brought up The Martian and being on Mars. Wyatt, can you talk about what being on Mars looks like?
Of course. All right. This is going to be really fun. All right. Rockets. I love rockets. I want to go to Mars. Let's get into how we're going to go to Mars. All right. So, the SpaceX Starship, that is how we're going to get to Mars. Starship has flown 10 times now. This year hasn't been good for Starship. We've had a couple explosions, a couple rapid unscheduled disassemblies, but we need Starship to get us to Mars and colonize Mars. So let's talk about SpaceX's plan. This document that I'm using right now was published in May of this year by SpaceX before their Ship 36 anomaly, which happened a few weeks after it was posted. So we're not really sure if SpaceX still plans on this. I'm sure they're still trying, but it's just the likelihood of this plan working doesn't seem that high anymore. Anyways, in 2026, SpaceX plans to send 5 landers with each ship carrying 10 tons of payload, and their goals of their 2026 mission is to prove that they can get to Mars with Starship, send minimum viable vehicles with the goal of maximize learning, and demonstrate key technologies needed for Mars transit and landing. In 2028, I should pause. In the next window, which would be in 2028 and 2029, SpaceX would want to send 20 landers, with each ship having 75 tons of payload. And that second mission would have the goals of land initial infrastructure, confirm resource availability, prepare landing areas, and deliver equipment for people. The first few missions won't be carrying people. These will actually, hopefully, maybe not the first mission, but at least the second mission will carry the Tesla Optimus robots to Mars, which would be pretty cool to see. Humanoid robots on Mars. Yeah. And then the 2030 to 2031 transfer window would aim to have 100 starships sent to Mars, with each ship having 150 tons of payload, and with the goals of resource mining and propellant generation, building roads and paths, actual habitat construction, and increased power generation and storage. And this is still before any humans actually get here. is just still the Tesla Optimus robots. And then in 2033, SpaceX will try to send 500 starships to Mars, with each ship carrying 300 tons of payload. So let me do some math really quick. 500 times 300, that's a large number. That's 150,000 tons of payload that SpaceX wants to send to Mars in 2033 without even sending any humans yet. Even in the 2033 transfer window, they still won't send any humans yet. With the 2033 transfer window, SpaceX will want to increase independence from Earth, mine and process Mars resources, and after that, hopefully, we will be sending humans to Mars. And it's exciting stuff. And I just hope that we can make that 2026 window. At the end of 2024, I thought, in my opinion, that it is possible that SpaceX could send starships to Mars in 2026, but with the bad luck that SpaceX has had with their Block 2 vehicle, it might not be possible. I'm not really sure yet. There's still a small chance that we can at least get one ship to Mars, because SpaceX still has a lot of stuff to do. Get their Block 3 ships up and running, which we still have to build those new generation vehicles, finish construction on Pad B at their Starbase facility. They have a lot to do. Demonstrate orbital refueling, which is going to be really important if we want to go to Mars, because you need to get those actual vehicles that are going to Mars into orbit and then send tanker starships to refuel those Mars starships, because, you need fuel and you use most of that fuel just trying to get into low Earth orbit. They have a lot to do, but I think they could still send at least one starship to Mars in 2026, but they will definitely be able to send plenty of ships in the 2028 to 2029 window.
Thank you guys so much for joining us on our episode today. And we want to take a moment to give a very big welcome to our new podcast speaker, Serena. Round of applause for her, who's going to be joining us in future episodes. Do you want to introduce yourself to our listeners real quick?
So I joined STEM my freshman year, and I was an apprentice for a whole year. And now I've been an ambassador, and I'm now a senior. So I've been with my whole high school life, I've been with STEM.
Yeah, that's amazing. And we are so excited to have you and just glad that you're part of our team. So once again, thank you guys so much. Everybody at home listening to us, your support means the world to us. And yeah, like always, if you guys have any ideas or any curiosities, we always encourage you to try to learn more about what you're curious in. So send us an email or a comment and we can touch that in a future episode. So I'm Taylor.
I'm Hattie Rose.
I'm Serena Casada.
And I'm Wyatt.
And we'll see you guys next time. Bye.